Insomniac was started in 1994. I started it with a desire to make console games. I was fortunate to run into a guy named Alex Hastings. He and I put together a demo for our first game, which was called Disruptor. We knocked on just about every publisher's door that we could, and we got rejected pretty much every time until we went to Universal Interactive Studios, where we met Mark Cerny. He took a look at the demo that we did and recognized the prowess of Al's programming and decided to offer us a 3-game contract with Universal. At that point, we were completely out of money, so it was a really good thing that he offered us the opportunity. Brian Hastings, who was Al's brother, came on board, so the three of us were working in San Diego trying to pull together Disruptor. We failed pretty badly and ended up moving to Los Angeles because, one, it allowed us to be closer to the talent, and two, we were able to work more closely with Mark Cerny. We managed to finish Disruptor in 1996. With Disruptor, we wanted to take what we thought was a fairly good story and blend it with what we hoped were pretty fun first-person shooter action. This was a game where we really learned how to make games. Our first playable we actually built by plotting points from an Excel spreadsheet because we didn't have any 3D software. For our first game, it actually came out a lot better than we had hoped. It sold about 200,000 copies worldwide and basically broke even for us. It really made us feel as though we had taken the right steps in terms of learning how to make games. After we finished Disruptor, we decided that we would radically change our direction in terms of the types of games that we make. With the PlayStation, people weren't yet taking advantage of the technology or the power that it offered. Al Hastings programmed a prototype engine on the PlayStation that allowed us to create these panoramic environments. And these are, for the PlayStation, very big spaces. With that engine, we knew that we'd have to come up with a character who could move pretty fast through the environments and kind of take advantage of these big views. Craig Stitt, one of our senior artists, said, "I've always wanted to do a game about a dragon." So we went with this kind of medieval pastoral theme, which worked very well. And furthermore, we began discussing the target audience. Nintendo, on the Nintendo 64, owned the younger market. And so I remember Mark Cerny in particular had suggested that we think about this demographic. It was a natural fit to make this kind of cute dragon, these bright, vibrant worlds, and gameplay that was accessible, and that's what we did with Spyro. The game really took off. It was one of the first games that was appropriate for ages 8 to 80 on the PlayStation, and I think it's ended up selling maybe close to 5 million copies. And the sequels, of course, have sold several million copies apiece as well. I think with Spyro, it allowed us to go from being a garage developer to a professional developer. With Spyro 2, we learned what making sequels was all about. We learned that consumers are not happy with just a bunch of additional levels. It was difficult to do because you can't change the characters, right? But we did try a few things that we thought would help people see Spyro a little differently. That kind of worked, but I don't think people really noticed it as much. What we did that was very different in Spyro 2 was we introduced mini-games. All the mini-games were extremely difficult to pull off. The programmers would be sweating over these portions of gameplay that gamers would maybe spend half an hour on. They were incredible time sinks, but as a result, it made Spyro 2 really varied. Spyro 3 was the last Spyro we did. There's not a whole lot more we could do with Spyro. Spyro doesn't have hands. So you can have him run, you can have him fly, jump, flame, but that gets old after 3 games. We felt a little bit tapped out with him. Furthermore, financially, it didn't make any sense for us to stay with Universal because it was a 3-party deal. Universal was a publisher, but not really. They were kind of a licensor for Spyro. They were sub-licensing it to Sony, and Sony was actually publishing it. So it made more sense for us just to work directly with Sony. When we moved off of Spyro, we jumped onto the PlayStation 2. We started experimenting with different gameplay concepts. One of those concepts was actually an adventure game, which never really got made. We went into about 6 months of pre-production on a game featuring a very different character in a much darker environment. Our team really wasn't into it, so we abandoned that and moved on to Ratchet. Ratchet was really the result of us kind of scrambling for an idea and Brian Hastings at one point saying, "Hey, what about doing a game with this character who flies from planet to planet with all these cool guns and gadgets?" Suddenly it just clicked for everybody. People started saying, "Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Why don't we do this kind of furry character? Maybe he could have a sidekick, and maybe that sidekick could be a robot or 3 robots." And It eventually was distilled into the characters we know now, Ratchet and Clank. Naughty Dog had offered to share some of their technology with us. Jason Rubin had given me a call and said, hey, are you guys interested in looking at what we did on Jack? So Al Hastings went over and looked at their background engine. We were able to use some of their code to develop a couple of our renderers on Ratchet and Clank. In return, later, we gave them some of our technology. So we began this kind of code sharing process, which really helped us out significantly. With Ratchet 1, we tried to move away from the traditional platformer by introducing elements that you see in other genres, like an inventory system, like weapons, like guns. And you don't really see little platformer characters running around with guns, or you didn't back then. We had Clank as a second playable character. We had a story-driven game. These are all things that we hadn't done before, and actually no other platformers were doing at that time. When we finished Ratchet 1, we weren't really sure how consumers would respond. The numbers of games that went out was fantastic for us, so we decided right then, hey, let's do a sequel. And we actually started working on the sequel pretty much as we were shipping Ratchet 1. We had a very clear vision for how we would take the genre in yet a different direction on Ratchet 2. We created a character growth system for Ratchet. We created a weapon upgrade system where the weapons also upgrade. It's no longer a game where you run through and you're just collecting bolts and buying weapons. It's really about growing your character. We had a lot of stuff for players, and because of all that stuff that we crammed in, it was a real challenge to finish the game on time, but we did. I think the distinguishing characteristics of an Insomniac game is the variety in the game. And the variety is due to the collaborative nature of our design process. We really try to involve everybody on the team in as many aspects of the game as we can. Everybody at Insomniac has an opportunity to contribute to the game design, story, character design, you name it, anything they're interested in.
If you can survive the Lightstorm training, you will bear the awesome responsibility of defending global democracy throughout the regions of space.
What about nasty Newark?
Of course, sacrifices must be made. Thank you for your cooperation.
Cut!
And if you don't like it, you can take your whiny, sniveling, snot-nosed populations, form a line behind me, and kiss my... We're still on? Well, turn it off, you idiot!